When you think of the human mind, most people think of the intellect, the reason, or ability to figure things out. In fact, that's about the extent of what a lot of people think of as the mind. Other people look at emotion. That's something else we have in our consciousness. We have feelings. And so we can talk about the intellect and feelings, reason and emotion. And in fact, a lot of discussion of human abilities and the human faculties, that's about as far as they go. Some people put in the will. We also have the ability to choose things, which is the basis of moral responsibility and so on. But there's another part of the mind that's gotten very little attention, especially over the last couple hundred years, and that is the imagination. Now, the imagination is simply the ability that all of us have to picture things in our minds. If I say tree, you can picture, you probably are picturing just when you hear that word, because language stimulates our imagination. When I say tree, you can think of a tree. You can think of a tree in your memory. You can think of the Christmas tree when you were 5 years old. You can think of a tree that you saw at your home, or magnificent tree you saw out in the wilderness. You can even think of a tree, if I say, think of a plaid tree. You can do that. We can imagine things, we can picture things in our mind, things that have existed in the past, things that are in the present. We can even picture things that don't exist, or that don't yet exist. And when you think of this ability to conjure up images, it's an incredible power of the human mind. Again, our daydreams, our fantasies, our reveries, when you just let your mind just wander from thing to thing, it's the imagination that's at work. Memory is part of our imagination. And so when you can recall things that happened recently or even in the distant past, we're actually able to bring back that experience that is long gone, bring it back to our conscious mind now. Again, it's quite incredible. Imagination is used for planning. People that planned this conference, they had to imagine everything that could possibly happen and go wrong and plan around it and make sure the chairs get set up and take care of all the logistics. That was an act of the imagination. I think one reason imagination is so neglected is that it has become associated with special people. Creative artists, they have a great imagination, obviously, as we'll get into. But I hear people say, oh, I just don't have an imagination. But no, you do. Everyone does. But it's neglected. And we don't think about it and reflect about it. But I would argue that the imagination is probably more prevalent at any given time than in our awareness than intellect. Yes, we figure out how to do things and we solve problems. Yes, that's something we can do. But I don't think that takes up as much as our lives as using our imagination. Yes, we have emotions. We feel things. But again, I think that much of what goes on in all of our minds really has to do with the imagination. Now, I want us to think about imagination and realize now, too, that art comes from the imagination of the artist, but it also addresses the imagination of those who see it or hear it, the audience. It's an imaginative relationship really on both parts. One of the first to make the connection between art and imagination, at least that I found, was Martin Luther. In his writings called Against the Heavenly Prophets, against the iconoclasts that we heard about, the people who were just smashing art and destroying every visual representation in the churches, and brought Luther out of hiding from translating the Bible to deal with these iconoclastic riots. He pointed out that, he said that it's not, that when we read the Bible, we can't help but form mental images of what we read. So when we read about Jesus on the cross, read about his suffering, read about his death, read about his resurrection. Again, notice what happened just when I say those words. We're picturing that work of our Lord. Luther said when we read the Bible, we form mental images of what we read. Okay, therefore, he said, if that's lawful, then why is it lawful to make visual images of what we're imagining? Okay, and that was the basis of his defense of art, of religious art at that time. But again, he's associating works of art with the mental images of the artist and of the audience. So art, again, comes from the imagination. Now, there are different senses of the word art. And again, that's a word that's often sort of glamorized and lifted up above ordinary experience, which I think marginalizes art and cuts us off from it. The old writers talked about the three kinds of art. The liberal arts. The word art basically means the exercise of human creativity. And so the liberal arts are something that was studied in universities and colleges, much like this one. So you have liberal arts requirements. And the purpose of that kind of education was to form that creative part of the mind. And studying literature and history and philosophy equip the mind to be able to develop its powers in many different ways. They called them liberal because from the word for freedom. These were the arts that contributed to freedom of the person, as opposed to the servile education that for the Greeks and Romans were given to slaves. All they cared about was just doing a job, making lots of money. That kind of reducing education to just the financial rewards, to just how you contribute to the economy, that was education given to slaves. Whereas free citizens were given an education for freedom. So the liberal arts came from that. There are also the mechanical arts, making shoes, building houses, making clothing, doing physical labor. Involves human creativity, and it involves the imagination. Those are the mechanical arts that are just implicit in ordinary life and in the ordinary functioning of an economy. And then there were the fine arts, the arts that the use of human creativity for its own sake, for the exercise of certain talents to make music and literature and drama and painting, sculpture, and so on. Works that are for aesthetic purposes, to create works of beauty and meaning. Those are the fine arts. That's what we're going to concentrate on, I think, mainly at this conference. But understand that human creativity goes beyond the arts. Even the things that go into making art applies in many other human endeavors. And when we talk about imagination, and again, I'm drawing on some older authors who did recognize the function of the imagination in a way that's been lost in the last couple hundred years. There's a creative function of the imagination, the ability to make things, to dream up things, to plan, to figure out. The imagination is under our control to a large extent. And this is how scientists create their models of the universe, how they devise experiments to try to measure things. This is how people in business plan their needs for the next day. This is how everyone functions with that creative power that human beings have, the creative imagination. But there's also a receptive imagination where we imagine things based on what we hear and what we see, what we're inspired to do and to think. And so that double function of imagination is very important. Now, again, art comes from the imagination of the artist. The artist starts with nothing and then makes something that was not there before. But also art addresses our imagination, the imagination of the audience. Art doesn't just address the intellect, although we can think about a work of art and analyze how it was made and figure out what it means. And that's a very valuable exercise. But the receiving it imaginatively comes first, and then we can think about it. Art does not just address the emotions. I've heard tell early in the modern era that dichotomy between reason and emotions, the idea, well, science addresses reason, the arts address the emotion. I don't think so. Art addresses the imagination. Now, in turn, we can respond emotionally to what we receive, to what we perceive imaginatively. Just as we can think about what it means, a great work of art really can move us emotionally in a very deep way. But first, I think we have to recognize how we're receiving it and how it's communicating by the imagination. Art doesn't just address the will, though art can inspire us, positively or negatively, frankly, to a moral response. Okay. Again, the work of art can engage our will to make us want to do something right or maybe do something wrong. But responding to art is not just what does it mean or how does it make me feel or what is the moral lesson here, but really, primarily, what is it doing to me? What is it doing to my imagination? And it's true that imagination sinks deep, deep into the heart. Imagination has to do with the storehouse of our experiences, our memories, our personalities, our deepest inner lives. These are functions of the imagination. What we imagine makes up a big part of our personal identity, our social identity, because imagination seems to be how our cultures and our community shape us, for better or for worse. It's not just what we believe, it's what we imagine that sort of becomes the lens through which we use our intellect and shapes our beliefs. Our worldview is shaped by what we're imagining and what we can imagine. So, things that shape our imagination: experiences, memories, cultural artifacts, and art, the music we listen to, the books we read, the movies and TV shows and videos we see, and the other art that we take in can have a profound influence on us. Now, imagination can benefit us. Imagination can make us more compassionate. Compassion and empathy. Empathy means seeing something from someone else's point of view. Okay, that's primarily an imaginative act. Compassion, putting ourselves in the shoes of another person and reacting to and feeling for that person so that we reach out to them in compassion. That takes an act of the imagination. Imagination can make us more sensitive. There's a real moral use of the imagination that I'm going to say some more about a little bit later. And of course, it can make us more effective in our relationship to others, in our work, what we contribute to society, and so on. Imagination can also hurt us. Imagination is the source of things we struggle with, like anxiety and worry. Notice when we're worried about something, we're imagining all the things that could go wrong, and we're imagining all at the same time, and we're reacting to it in the different ways as if these things are going to happen, when actually only one at most can happen. It's flying in on the airplane now, and I realize that people often when they fly, worry about, will the plane be late? Will we make it on time? Will I make the connections? Will the plane crash? Now worry, will the plane vanish without a trace? Never be thought of, seen again. Again, you can just paralyze yourself with worry, right? Because you're imagining all these different outcomes and reacting to them at the same time. So our imaginations can run away with us and kind of cause that kind of paralysis and fear and misery. Imagination can also hurt us morally. The scriptures talk about this. Genesis 6:5, this is in the context of the Noah story. We'll see what the new Russell Crowe movie does to the way we imagine the Noah story. It may completely change it for us. But there's that text, Genesis 6:5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Again, it wasn't just the wicked, the bad things that were done. I'm sure the Russell Crowe movie is going to really dramatize all of that. But the imagination of the thoughts of people's heart, what was evil. Jesus himself picks up this theme on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you've heard that, thou shalt not kill. And of course, many people can feel, well, I haven't killed anyone, and feel very good about themselves, but Jesus intensifies the point. He said, when you're angry in your heart at someone, when you despise someone, when you have contempt for them, when you have hatred in your heart for someone, before God, the state of your soul is that of a murderer. You're not loving your neighbor. Inside, you're hating your neighbor. And we're responsible for that. And again, what he's describing are the imaginations of our heart. Again, Jesus said, you shall not commit adultery. But again, we learned that lustful fantasies can involve, as he says, committing adultery in your heart. And so Jesus isn't just interested in our external behavior, but in our internal imaginations. These can twist us. These can distort us. These can harm our souls, just like overt acts of evil. And so the whole point of the gospel is, and growing in the gospel, is to get at the heart, to change us on the inside, to repair our inner lives as well as our external behavior. And that involves redeeming the imagination. Another problem with imagination is idolatry. Acts 17:29, St. Paul's sermon, the Areopagus in Athens to the Greeks. He says, by the way, quoting the Greek poet about how we are all God's offspring, he says, being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. So that God is not an image formed by the art and imagination of man. And yet this is something that trips us up. You know, God makes us. Okay, we don't make him. But we do construct our own gods out of our imagination, what we want him to be. Gods that are easier to control and do what we want and manipulate. That's idolatry. And Luther made the point that idolatry does not have to be making a physical idol of image of worship. That again, our false theologies, our homemade syncretic ways that, the God I worship wouldn't do that. Again, it involves a kind of mental construction, an act of our imagination, so that we make a God in our image, whereas he makes us in his image. But again, all of the different ideologies we dream up are acts of the imagination. The ideologies of power, different rationales and excuses for oppression and for harming people and for getting our way. These are false idols. And like other idols, we can sacrifice human beings to those idols, don't we? In fact, that's much of the history, I think, of the human race, sacrificing human beings for these humanly devised, imaginative ideologies and ways of thinking. And again, those of you who are artists, and I know there are many of you here, there's another aspect to this. Artists, at some point, come to the realization that your art is not going to save you. In Isaiah 44, 9-20, there's a wonderful discussion of a craftsman, an artist, making one of these idols. And it describes, the artist goes and cuts down a tree, and he carves it, and he takes metal, and he works it skillfully. And Isaiah is actually kind of praising the skill and craftsmanship involved with this. And then he's describing creating this idolatrous image. And at the end he concludes, he, the artist, uses half of the wood to make a fire, to warm himself and cook his food, and the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." Making a work of art and asking it, "Deliver me, for you are my God." Again, your art is valuable, it's precious, but it's not going to deliver you. And the sooner you realize that, the better off you will be as an artist and as a human being. Because so many artists tragically come to that point, and for all of their art, that doesn't save them from despair and meaninglessness and hopelessness. And the list of modern artists and writers who commit suicide at the height of their artistic greatness is one of the most tragic things that you can learn about. But Christianity addresses the imagination, and it redeems the imagination. Christianity is a religion of the tangible. Unlike a lot of other religions and philosophies and ideologies, Christianity is not about abstractions. It's not just about ideas. Christianity is about the tangible. It's not just about spiritual things, it's about material things. It's about creation. God created this physical universe and saw that it was not just good, but very good. You know, in some religions, the physical world is an illusion, or it's bad, or it's something we have to escape from. Whereas the biblical account is that the material world is from the hand of God Himself, and therefore it has great value. The very concept of creation, very important in the art world, as you know. That's a biblical theological concept. The ancient Greeks saw art in terms of imitation. That the artist is imitating something that's already there. And creation itself was based on a pre-existing creation. So the Greeks talked about cycles of creation, but it never had a beginning. There was never a creation from nothing. Whereas this concept that God created the universe from nothing was taken over by artists. And this concept of creating something, not just reforming it, not just imitating something, but making something from nothing, was shaped by this theological concept of God's creation. But it isn't just the creation, the incarnation, that God came in the flesh, that God became a human being. Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, in a material way. God became flesh. He became matter. God made Himself tangible. Not only that, God in the flesh suffered. He was nailed to the cross. In some mysterious way for our redemption, taking the world's sins into Himself, taking the world's sufferings into Himself, and atoned for it. He died, and He rose again for us. Again, that's tangible. Those aren't abstractions. Those are real. Taking human experience of our own sins, for example, and somehow He took those into the cross. this message is expressed in tangible ways, in the sacraments, the water, simple, ordinary water that we can touch and feel, and they're so familiar with. He uses water in baptism to convey that message, and again, to engraft us into himself. He uses bread and wine, the bread of his body and the wine of his blood, again, to proclaim that and to reach us and to apply it so it's as tangible an experience as tasting. And he gives us his word. He communicates to us in language, in human language. Again, reading is maybe the best exercise of the imagination that you can have. I'm going to praise the visual arts very highly, but when we see a visual image of a film or something like that, or a painting, we're receiving the visual image made by the artist who created it. When you're reading, you're forming the images yourself, aren't you? You're picturing it yourself as the story unfolds, as the piece of writing develops. And so that's wonderful training of the imagination. And in the Bible, it's exactly what we have. The Bible is not just a collection of abstract doctrines or even commands, but the form of it is stories, historical narratives, parables, descriptions, symbols, visions. And when we read the Bible, it's addressing, yes, our intellect, yes, our will, yes, our spirit, but it's addressing our imaginations. And that's one reason it sinks in so deeply. That word, in turn, sets forth the calling and the vocation. Vocation just means the calling of artists. The remarkable section in Exodus 35, I'll just read it, talking about God ordaining the art that's to go in the tabernacle. And it talks about the calling of Bezalel, the artist. It's the first time the Bible explicitly discusses the doctrine of vocation. It says, "Then Moses said to the people of Israel, 'See, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, the tribe of Judah.'" And he called him by name. So being an artist, it's a personal thing. It's a personal calling, a gift not given to everyone. If you have artistic gifts, God has called you. And then listen to what it says. "And he has filled him with the Spirit of God." So the first person said to be filled with the Holy Spirit in the Bible, the artist. And then it gives the gifts for art, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship. Again, being an artist involves a kind of skill, talent that not everyone has. Skill with intelligence. It's interesting that the artist is not the wild bohemian type that just creates out of a frenzy. There has to be an intelligence to figure out how this is to be done. With knowledge, the artist has to know something, know the craft, know the art form, has a fund of knowledge to build on and build from. And with all craftsmanship. Again, craftsmanship. Okay, these are the gifts for art. It goes on to devise artistic designs. to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, for work in every skilled craft. And he has inspired him to teach, both him and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. You know, it's interesting, most artists, well, not a lot of artists are able to make a living completely at their art. Many artists, maybe most artists, teach. Those on the faculty here and elsewhere, the musicians giving music lessons and the people teaching art in the different schools. That's part of God's gift for art, interestingly enough. And that also tells us that artistic gifts that other people have are usually brought out by means of a teacher. And so someone that might have artistic ability, but they generally need a teacher to bring that out. So teaching is one of the gifts for art. Goes on, he has filled them with skill to do every sort of work, done by an engraver or by a designer or by an embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of workman or skilled designer. Bezaleel and Aholiab and every craftsman in whom the Lord has put skill and intelligence to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. And Moses called Bezaleel and Aholiab and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord had put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come to do the work. Okay, so Bezaleel and Aholiab had this direct commission from God, but the other people, God was apparently gifting them too. And their heart stirred them up to come because God puts skill and craftsmanship in them too. And they came for the work of making this incredible work of art that was a place of worship. And the things in it, the Ark of the Covenant, the candlesticks, all of the other things that went into that. And so the arts in worship are established very early in Scripture, certainly in the Old Testament, the art of the tabernacle and the art of the temple, and also in Christian worship. Christian worship today, like we just had, the music and the drama and the dance, and notice how the drama team was, the psalm was talking about the hills. They had the green cloth, and the sea had the blue cloth. Now, all of us watching that, we knew it was just cloth, but notice how our imaginations kicked in, and we saw that also as the green hills and the blue waters, right? Again, we were reacting imaginably to what we were shown. But today, it's been said that the only time anybody sings today pretty much is in church or at a ball game. Because people used to sing all the time for their own enjoyment. Now we just listen to other people sing. But in church, we still sing. And the church is a great patron of music to this day, including piano and organ and other kinds of music. Today, again, however people worship, I know at our church, we follow the old historic liturgy, and it's just an assault on the senses. The music, the incense, the banners, the rich language, rich evocative language, the standing and the bowing and the kneeling. It's completely, it's physical, it's imaginative, and it has an imaginative effect. There's a long Christian tradition of the arts. When you walk through an art museum, you'll see in every gallery, if it's arranged historically, almost you'll find Christian expressions. Now, this is odd because most philosophies and ideologies and even religions will have one style. What's striking to me is that Christianity has always been expressed in just about every style. There are obviously the great Byzantine and medieval images, artistic images. But then when you get into the Renaissance, a very different style, the classical styles, you'll find Christian works of art explicitly exploring Christianity. When you get into the classical era, the same thing. When you get to the Romantic era, the same thing. When you get into modernism, you have Rouault and other powerful Christian artists. And it goes on and on. Because the Christian imagination is so big. It's just so big. It's beyond just the little limited, again, the constructions that are so common that sort of go in and out of favor. The Christian imagination embraces the whole range of sorrow and joy. The recognition of evil and of goodness, the law and the gospel. Okay. But even artists that are not religious in what they're portraying, even the most secular art, can, I think, play an important role for Christians in developing a Christian imagination. Now, to be sure, I think art of various kinds can influence us negatively. If all you're taking in is nihilistic art and expression, and that's what you're reading, that's what you're seeing, and those are films, that's the music you listen to, it's going to make you a nihilist, or close to it if you're not careful. If you just consume, shallow, sentimental, one-dimensional fare, it's not going to do much for you. It might make you into more of a shallow, one-dimensional person. If you're taking in art that's hateful, or it's going to tend to affect your imagination, and it's going to make you hateful on some level if you're not careful. Or hypersexualized, it's going to have an impact. But here's some things I think that we can get and should be trying to get to develop our imagination, even from artists that have no reference at all to Christianity. One thing art can do is to make us notice things. Make us notice things that we ordinarily ignore or neglect. It's been said, Victor Shklovsky, the Russian formalist critic, says that one of the things that art does is to defamiliarize our experience. We get so familiar with things that we stop noticing them. You just take things for granted and you stop appreciating it. We can take people for granted and we stop appreciating them. And this familiarity can be killing, really. It's been said that perhaps the most debilitating spiritual problem of our day is boredom. Boredom. But sometimes people get to where they're just bored with everything. Nothing pleases them. Nothing stimulates them. They care for nothing. And that's really a hellish condition. One of the things art can do is to counter that, to defamiliarize. Shklovsky says that a work of art will lift something up from the normal, everyday experience and present it from a new angle or in a new context to help us pay attention to it deeply. I remember seeing a painting of some oranges. And I really loved that painting. And I was really loving the texture of the oranges. and the little juice that one of them was peeled part way, and it's just a wonderful painting. And I remembered, we have oranges on our kitchen table all the time, and I pay no attention to them. But after seeing that painting, it made me look at the actual oranges and appreciate the texture and the color and the beauty of those oranges. And art, a story about marriage can waken us up to our own marriages and the things that maybe we're neglecting. Even an abstract work of color and shape can help us to appreciate colors. And we see all around us, and the shapes and the forms that are everywhere. Again, people today, we have a hardness of heart. That psalm referred to it. But now our hearts are so calloused and unfeeling. And works of art often can break through that to make us, again, aware of the world, this beautiful world that God has given us and placed us in, make us aware of other people and our relationships with them, and to make us aware of ourselves and our own condition. Another thing artists can do is to awaken our imaginations. Our imaginations function almost automatically to the point that we ignore those. They're so familiar, we don't reflect on those too. But a good work of art can make our imagination kind of wake up. And you see that in different ways. The old writers and philosophers and theologians like Thomas Aquinas talk about the connection between beauty and love. When we see a beautiful painting, we love that painting. Or when we see a beautiful tree, an actual tree, we love that tree. And so art can waken up, aesthetic experience can help us to bring out that capacity for love of the world. And it can also awaken in us love for other people. Art and compassion. I mentioned this briefly, but the scriptures are full of this. St. Paul tells us to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And so he's calling for that imaginative act of empathy. And art can awaken that in us. Even art that's ugly, or art about suffering, or pain, or darkness. It's not beautiful in a conventional way, but in opening up human pain, that can make us feel compassion for others who undergo that pain. And that's a very healthy and important spiritual discipline. Art also can give us a glimpse of transcendence. Glimpse that there's something more than just this material world that we're in just for a few years until we die. The sense that there's more than we can perceive, giving us a glimpse of the infinite. I'll be talking about that some more in my next talk. Just in conclusion, to tie into the festival here. I think we've gotten a good sample of it already just in the worship. But as we all enjoy what we're going to be experiencing, the music, and with Hildegard of Bingen, that would be so great to hear her work. The art of Tim Larson, who takes biblical images described in Ezekiel and paints them. So that we can experience them directly. Again, the drama about C.S. Lewis and Freud, all of the buskers that I hear we're going to have. Again, I hope you just let them all impact your imagination. And again, it isn't just a matter of figuring it out what they mean or what's the lesson of that. Take it in and see what it does to your imagination. Respond to them with gratitude and praise. Ruskin says when we see a beautiful work of art, it gives us a sense of we're thankful for that. It makes us feel thankful. It also fills us with praise for the artist who is able to make such a great work. And he says, but we should take that gratitude and that praise a step further. Gratitude and praise both for the artists and to the God who gave them their gifts. The God who creates beauty and meaning through their callings. The God who made us human beings in such a way that we can take such joy in what they do. So, looking forward to this conference, look forward to the conversations that come from it, and I'll enjoy experiencing it with all of you. Well, thank you.